Hi, it's Adam again. Welcome back to another of my ranking Agatha Christie, the top 15 novels and short stories of Agatha Christie. Today we're up to book number 9. My choice for my ninth favorite Agatha Christie novel or short story is, ta-da, The ABC Murders. This is one of Agatha Christie's most well-known stories. This is when you're looking on the internet and you're looking at the people who take the time to rank all the Agatha Christie novels that they've read. A lot of times this one is very, very high on her list. A lot of times it's comes in first, maybe second, or even third. I've seen this one higher on a lot of lists, and so this is one of her most well-known detective stories. And it's a great story. There's no doubt about it. I really enjoy this one. I was really thrilled when I was reading it. It's a good time from start to finish. It's an easy read. It'll only take you a couple of sittings to get through it. Believe me, you'll be invested in the story, and you'll want to find out who the murderer is right away. So this one, I think when I read it, it took me 2 days to get through it because I was just so enthralled with it. It is a really well written story. The one question you may be having is, why isn't it higher on my list? Number 9 may seem quite a bit lower to a lot of you guys. And I think the main reason for me not putting ABC Murders higher, it's a tremendous detective story. But the characterization is not quite up to the highest level, I feel. There are some characters in this story who are not that well drawn out. You just don't get to know them very well. Now, that's not to say that's true for all the characters. We see Hercule Poirot. This is a Poirot detective story, and his good friend Captain Hastings are there. They're well drawn out. We get to spend a lot of time with them. Poirot is at the peak of his game. Agatha Christie is at the peak of her writing abilities. This book was written in 1935. It was interesting when I was doing a little bit of research in preparation for this video. Agatha Christie wrote 3 books just in the 1935 calendar year, and those 3 books were all really high shelf books. The ABC Murders, my 9th favorite Christie. Another one she wrote in 1935 was 3-Act Tragedy, which my last video was actually about 3-Act Tragedy, so my 10th favorite Christie. And the other book that she wrote in 1935 was called Death in the Clouds, and where will that fit in on my ranking? Stay tuned. But Agatha Christie is really at the height of her powers in 1935, and like I said, this is a Poirot book, and she just draws Poirot's character really well in the story. But some of the other characters are not as well developed. There's only a few handful of people, Poirot and Hastings and a few others, that you really feel like you really know them as people in this story, and so that's, I think, one of the reasons why this is not higher on my list, is because the characterization just doesn't add up to being the best or the second best or third best Christie novel. There are some that are just slightly better for those reasons, that they have the wonderful detective story, which this one certainly does. This one has a fabulous detective story. And they also have the characterization. So if you can combine those two aspects of having a wonderful detective story with full of suspense and intrigue, and then also have really, memorable characters that leap off the page and you remember for quite a while, then those are going to be my very favorite Christie books, which we'll get to as we get a little bit farther into this countdown. So the ABC Murders certainly has the detective aspect of it. It's an incredible mystery, but the characters just don't quite come to life as much as in some of her other books. So that's what holds it back a little bit for me. Okay, let's talk about what this story is about. The ABC Murders is a little bit different than a lot of her other books because it involves a serial killer. And so serial killers were a rare thing in the 1930s. Certainly there had been serial killers before, such as Jack the Ripper, a famous London serial killer from the 1880s. But nothing like today, where we, and this must just be because of the 24/7 media cycle that we are obviously aware of serial killers because they get a lot of attention when they do spring up from time to time. But in the 30s, with less media focus, there was not as much knowledge about serial killers. So it's kind of a new thing. This is the first time in an Agatha Christie book that we're dealing with a serial killer. And so and how he goes about it is very precise and very methodical. He starts with a letter A, and then he moves on to the letter B, and then he moves on to the letter C, and then letter D, and you get the idea. Will he go all the way through the alphabet? Well, we don't know for sure because Poirot and Hastings eventually do stop him. And so, but the serial killer is successful at the beginning of the book. So what happens is he sends a letter to Poirot, letting him know that he will strike there. And he doesn't necessarily, in the first note that he sends Poirot, he doesn't necessarily say that it's going to be a murder. There's going to be a mystery in connection with the town of Andover, and he gives Poirot the specific date when there will be a mystery that will happen in the town of Andover. And sure enough, Poirot doesn't. I mean, what can you do? Andover is a largest place, and so this might be some kind of a crackpot. But there is a woman, and her name happens to be Alice Asher. See the connection with the letter A there, murdered in the town of Andover. And we find out that after Poirot and Hastings, they go to Andover, and they do some investigating, and it turns out that she was fairly, just a common woman. She owned a cigar and newspaper shop where she sold cigars, cigarettes, and newspapers. And somebody came into the store and murdered her. Now, of course, as is true with any murder, the people who are closest to her always come up under the most scrutiny or suspicion. She had a drunkard as a husband. His name was Franz Asher. Perhaps he'd even threatened when he was drunk to kill her in the past. Poirot doesn't hang too much credence on this. It doesn't seem that her husband would be the type of person to plot out such an elaborate murder, which would include, even sending Poirot a warning note about it ahead of time. That doesn't sound like her husband. So, yeah, there's not too much that he can do other than just investigate and try and put some clues together and find out what he can until the murderer sends Poirot another note, and he says that the next murder will take place in Bexhill on a certain date again, and I don't remember the date specifically. That's not that important. But so now Poirot and Hastings, they're paying a little bit more attention, and sure enough, the woman murdered in Bexhill is a woman. Bexhill is a coastal town, and the woman who's murdered in Bexhill her name is Betty Barnard. She happens to be a waitress at a local cafe that serves people who come to the coast for their vacations. She was known to be kind of a pretty young girl, and so now the newspapers are paying a little bit more attention. And is what Poirot and Hastings are trying to figure out is they're trying to figure out, is there any connection between the two murders? What's the connection between the two murderers? And it doesn't appear that there is any connection. They don't. The victims' families don't know each other. There's no common interest. There's no link between the two women. And even the murder, Alice Asher was bludgeoned over the top of her head, and Betty Barnard was strangled. And so it doesn't seem like even there's a connection in the way that the style that they're murdered. It just so happens that the third murder, the serial killer strikes again. He sends Poirot another letter. He says, this time we're moving on to, you'll notice that each of the towns also are going on this ABC pattern. Now we're up to Churston. And so we're racing all over England from the north to the south to the middle of England. And the murder will take place at Churston. And the man who's murdered is a man named Carmichael Clarke, who is a wealthy antiques collector. So he was a doctor, and then he inherited some money from his rich relatives, and so he was a very, very wealthy man. And now the media is paying a lot of attention to it because a very prominent person in the Churston community has been murdered. And so again, it's up to Poirot and Hastings, and Scotland Yard has appointed a man. So Inspector Japp is at the beginning of the story, but he quickly bows out because he realizes that in this case where there's a serial killer, there's going to be some psychology that's playing into this whole thing. And so that's not Japp's cup of tea, so he appoints a younger detective to help Poirot investigate. The younger detective's name is Inspector Crome, and so Crome works with Poirot and Hastings as they come to try and find out what type of mind or what type of a person would be willing to kill one person after another. And so the hunt is on, and of course you know that Poirot, Hastings is just kind of his, he's his Watson to Poirot being the Holmes, but maybe even Hastings is a little bit less helpful than Watson is in the Sherlock Holmes stories. But Hastings, he's in the right place. Poirot values Hastings not for his ability to penetrate into the mind of a killer, because that's Poirot's job after all, but to give Poirot the idea of what would a common British person think. And so Captain Hastings he's an everyman in the Agatha Christie stories, and so it is through Hastings that Poirot is able to see the mind of a typical British person. Hastings even has a very common name. I mean, English kids in school, one of the things that they always learn about is the Battle of Hastings, because it's a seminal moment in English history. So it's a common thing. It's something that all English people share. And so Hastings is a perfect name for a person who's going to represent what the common English person is going to think at the time. But he's very helpful to Poirot for those reasons. And Hastings is likable because he's in so many of the Agatha Christie stories. Like I said, it's a great detective story. A few of the characters aren't really that well drawn out, but one of the things that's interesting in this story that I really like is that the people who are related to the murder victims, they come together and they want to help Hercule Poirot solve the crime. And so we have people like Mary Drower, who is the niece of the first murdered woman, Alice Asher. Mary Drower is her niece, and she loved her aunt, and so she comes to Poirot and says, I'd be willing to help you out any way I can. We have Megan Barnard, who is Betty Barnard. The second victim is her sister. We have Donald Fraser, who is Betty Barnard's her boyfriend, essentially, and he and Megan come together to want to help Poirot in any way that they can solve the crimes. And then we get Franklin Clarke, who is the brother of Carmichael Clarke, who was also murdered. And we have Thora Grey, who is an assistant to Carmichael Clarke and helped him. It was very close to him, actually. She's a very lovely young lady, and actually Carmichael Clarke's wife was a little bit jealous of Thora Grey because he thought that Carmichael Clarke's wife was ill. She's set to inherit his fortune, but she's very ill, and so she was jealous that Thora Grey might be trying to get closer to Carmichael Clarke before she dies, so that she could inherit the money instead of having Carmichael give the money to his wife. So these five people, Mary Drower, Donald Fraser, Megan Barnard, Franklin Clarke, and Thora Grey, they form what's called a special legion, and they help Poirot and Hastings and the Scotland Yard. They help find clues, and they go back to the crime scenes of the three murders, and they talk to people, and then they try and just tie up loose ends and help out any way they can. I kind of like that aspect of this story where these group of people are, obviously they're concerned that the murder victim be found because they want, some justice to be done for the loss of their relatives. I like how this is an aspect of the story. It's kind of a different thing that's taken place in a lot of the Agatha Christie stories. You may remember, if you've seen my video on 3-Act Tragedy, which was my number 10 favorite Agatha Christie novel, that they did have kind of a similar thing in that, where three people, Hermione, Egg, Gore, Lighton Gore, the actor, I've forgotten his name now, the actor, and then Mr. Satterthwaite come together in 3-Act Tragedy, and they help Poirot investigate the crimes as well. So this is kind of similar to that, and so, but I think it adds a real fun element to the story, and you get to know the characters a little bit better through that way. ABC Murders, like I said, is a tremendous conclusion. I did not solve the crime myself. I had somebody else in mind as the murder victim, and when that little twist ending at the end, Agatha Christie does so well. You didn't see it coming. She pulls the rug out from under your feet, and you're like, oh. But then the great thing about Christie is that her endings are always, well, not always, but most of the time they're just absolutely logical, and you think to yourself, wow, how did I not see that coming? Which makes her just, a great writer. She's always keeping a couple of steps ahead of her readers. And, you come to the end of the novel and you're just like, it's perfect. It's perfect. So I hope you read ABC Murders if you haven't done so. The BBC adaptation with David Suchet as Poirot is magnificent. They did a really good job with that one. It's one of the better ones that I've seen. I really like that one. I have not seen the new movie. You may have noticed that my book has a cover with a recent adaptation that the BBC did a couple of years ago. Have not seen this, have not heard good things about this version of it. I think I heard that they changed it quite a bit from the original story. They wanted to make it darker and more violent, and so that's not for me. I don't really like it when the people who are making the movies change a lot from what's the book. I like it when they're more respectful of the book. I can put up with a few changes, but I don't like it when they completely change the story. And it sounds like they did for that one. So anyways, it may be good. You may like it. I just haven't had the chance to see it yet, or really haven't made a point of seeing it. But it's ABC Murders. It's a great book. Yeah, so if you have read it, share some comments down in the comment section with me, why you liked it so much, or if you didn't like it, if you figured out who the murderer was before you finished to the end of the story. And yeah, like this video, subscribe, and I'll be back pretty soon to tell you what my eighth favorite Agatha Christie novel is. Until then, hope you're having a good day. Bye.